Chapter 3. The weeks leading up to summer camp seemed to drag on forever. The school had already let the children of St. Farr out for the summer 3 weeks earlier, and Brett was bored. St. Farr didn't have any options to entertain people, and that was especially difficult for the children of the small town. There weren't too many of them, so friends were scarce. The friends Brett did have were at the mercy of their parents. Although school was out, and they got to face every new day with bright eyes and a world full of possibilities, their parents would rein in their wild minds with agonizing ropes of house chores and errands. After spending the first day of summer at the only park in St. Farr, Brett wasn't sure if scrubbing toilets was really worse than baking in the rays of the Texas sun while taking turns on one of 2 swings that the playground housed. As the days got hotter, the large statue of Ferris the flamingo watched the boys move from the swing set, slowly slouching further and further, t-shirts soaking in sweat, hunting for scraps of shade scattered across the park. The entire time Brett suffered the sweltering heat, crushing boredom, and monotonous house chores, he was daydreaming about all the great times awaiting him at Youngston Summer Camp. Youngston was a small week-long day camp in the middle of nowhere, Texas. The camp consisted of roughly 10 acres of overgrown ranch land that the owner had determined long ago was unworthy of crops or cattle. The thick clay soil was impossible to move, even with the largest green or red-painted tractors the neighbors offered. The owners eventually determined that simply marketing the tract as a place where children could come and learn the simple wilderness skills and importance of teamwork for a small fee. The scheme worked like a charm, and parents from the surrounding empty plains would drive their children to the site early in the morning, wave goodbye, then come back and pick them up in the evening after enjoying a productive, childless day. Youngston Summer Camp wasn't exactly fun for the children, but it was better than spending every day at St. Farr or a similar adult-centric town. Once the teens arrived at the camp and saw their parents speed away, the children would quickly realize that this was not the summer camp they had seen on TV. There were some familiar features of the idyllic summer camp vision they came expecting to see. There was a pond with a rowboat. There was a dining area with shorter grass and some tall trees, and several picnic tables. There was also a small cast of staff who were either nearly young enough to be their classmates or old enough to protest the Vietnam War. Not a single counselor was between the two. Youngston not living up to expectations didn't bother any of the teens who attended the camp. It was still an opportunity to meet and spend time with boys and girls from places you've likely never been. There was some novelty in that. Every day when the teens arrived at Youngston Summer Camp, they would gather around the flagpole near the picnic tables. There they would sit and talk while they waited for one of the odd counselors to arrive and give them instructions for the day. Typically, those instructions consisted of a quick welcome, a reminder not to hurt each other, and a plea to stay away from the coral snakes under the shed at the back of the property. The snake bites were deadly, and the camp did not have the insurance to cover such a tragedy. Brett had arrived in Youngston on the first day with no friends, but he quickly found a small group of boys and girls who all naturally gravitated toward one another. That entire week he tagged along with the group, going to the pond, playing soccer, and exploring the property. The entire experience was pleasant, but something he would forget in another couple years, if it hadn't been for the Friday night dinner. It was tradition at Youngston Summer Camp to have the teens pair off into couples on the final night of their camp experience. Those couples would sit together for a date at the final dinner, and there would be a small dance afterward. All the teens looked forward to Friday night, seeing it as an opportunity to convert the hours spent flirting with one another into something more concrete. An official dinner and dance date is not something 14-year-olds in rural Texas get to experience very often. There was a catch to Friday night dinner, though. The couples were chosen by camp counselors. After spending every day of his week at camp, forging relationships with a specific small group of boys and girls, Brett was told he and May would be having dinner together. That was the first time they officially met. Dinner went as well as a blind date at 14 years old can go. Brett was awkward and didn't know what to talk about. May made an effort to practice formal etiquette and treat the dinner as her first real date. Both teens fumbled their way through without getting too much food on their clothes or too much embarrassment on their egos. The meal, both the food and the company, was forgettable. The dance is what made the night unforgettable. Brett carried more self-conscious anxiety than the typical 14-year-old boy. Those thoughts paralyzed him at once when the plates were cleared and the music started. He debated acting too cool to dance and sitting at the table until a majority of the other teens had already started dancing. May would not allow it. She firmly grabbed both his wrists and pulled him to his feet, leaving the safety of the worn picnic bench behind. May led Brett out into the empty circle of flattened grass where the Youngston Summer Camp held their dance every Friday. The small area was completely devoid of teenagers, and the entire space was filled by just the two of them. Holding his hands and guiding him around the ring, May danced freely with flowing arm movements and pointed toes. She had trained as a ballerina in a small local studio her entire life, and although this ranch was nothing like the hardwood floor she was used to, she brought the spirit of motion to life in front of all the campers. The entire time she danced, she coaxed Brett to join. Eventually he did, marking the first time Brett was able to let loose and be himself in a public setting as a teenager. Eventually, most of the other campers crowded into the circle, mostly joining in for the slow songs, where they had an excuse to hold their date close and sway under the stars. After an hour of kicking, jumping, lifting, dipping, waving, popping, and laughing, May's dad arrived to take her home to Stockdale, or Floresville. Brett could never remember which. Before leaving their last magical night at Youngston Summer Camp, May and Brett had exchanged phone numbers. They were both young and neither of them could drive, but maybe they could keep in contact. Call every once in a while to catch up and talk about their day. Maybe they could even convince their parents to drive them into a town somewhere midway between their homes and let them see each other once before the summer was over. In reality, Brett and May never had a single phone call, leaving that one night as the only time the two had ever seen or heard from one another until that first day of senior year.